So, what is a RESTful API? REST stands for Representational State Transfer. A REST API is an interface that is stateless, so for each request the receiving system doesn't know anything about any previous requests. It uses a client-server model via a request-response architecture. It utilizes the standard HTTP verbs and status codes, such as GET, POST, PATCH and DELETE. This allows you to create, read, update and delete data. This is also known as CRUD. It is important to note that REST is not a standard. It is a set of principles that if an API was to follow would make it RESTful. REST is generally preferred over SOAP due to its simpler implementation and mostly uses JSON for the response output. JSON is simpler and less verbose than XML, which is what SOAP uses. We'll be using JSON exclusively in this course. Examples of what an API can be used for are: load and update data using a client application. This may be mobile or a desktop application. So for example, if you use Facebook on a smartphone, when you request your friend list, that calls a Facebook API to retrieve the friend list. Or it could be the fact that you upload an image from your smartphone to share with your friends on the social network such as Facebook. The API usage is hidden from the user as a client application carries out the necessary actions using the APIs on the user's behalf. Example usage of a RESTful API to get user details of a user with an ID of 1 is get /users/1. The /1 is the user ID. So, how is it implemented? A RESTful API is implemented using HTTP verbs that is sent with a request. POST is used to create, GET is used to retrieve, PATCH is used to update, PUT is used to replace, and DELETE is used for delete. The most common verbs that are used day to day are GET and POST. When using a web browser such as Google Chrome and you click a link to open a page, this is a GET request, as you are getting or retrieving the data that is on the page from the server. If you have ever filled out a form on a website and pressed the submit button, then you have used POST, as you have posted the form data to the server. A POST request will usually have a request body, as you are supplying some data to the server for the server to process. The server takes the request and processes it and then replies with a response. This includes any output as well as the HTTP response code. So for the request get users/1 to get the user with ID 1, that would reply, for example, with a status code of 200, which basically means OK, that was received and it worked, and then it will respond back with the body in the request. So for example, we have an ID here of 1, a name of the user and an age of the user. The HTTP status codes, the common ones are listed here, but there's many more. There's a good website, and I've put it on screen now, for HTTP status codes. Have a look at this website and you'll be able to see a lot more detail about what each status code means. So 200 is used for OK. If you were creating a user by using the POST, create, then that should respond back if it was successful with a 201 response code. 400 is basically used for if something is not formatted correctly on the request. So say it had mandatory fields for creating a user, such as name, and you sort of forgot to put that in or missed it out on purpose. What it should reply back with is a 400 code, which is a bad request because you've missed out on mandatory data. The 401 code is for unauthorized. So basically, if you go to an endpoint and you haven't logged in or you don't have access, then it should be 401 unauthorized, basically telling you that you need to authenticate. 403 sort of goes hand in hand with 401. If you have authenticated, but you don't have access, so for example, if you are a general user and only administrative users can perform an action such as reset someone's password or something like that. So if you're a general user and you try to reset someone's password, it should be a 403 forbidden because you are not allowed to do that, only an administrator is. 404 you've probably seen, generally browsing using a web browser anyway, is where you click on a link and the link's dead. So the endpoint is not available. So if we go to say get /users/5 and a user with an ID of 5 doesn't exist, you should get a 404 error. 405 is method not allowed. So apart from these methods down this left hand side here, There's many more, but these are the general ones that we use in a REST API. If we try and delete all users using the root delete/users, that shouldn't be allowed, because generally you delete users one at a time. Whereas if you post, which is create/users, that should allow you to create one user. If you were deleting a user, you would delete at the beginning there, the verb, /users/id, so you delete that one user. Now obviously if you try and delete all users using delete/users, you should get a 405 method not allowed. A conflict, a 409 error, is if you try and create a duplicate. So say you create a user that has a duplicate username, for example. That should return a 409 conflict error. A 500 error is usually where the processing on the server has failed. And usually what will happen is you'll get a 500 error with a generic response, or depending how you code this, it might actually respond with an appropriate error message. So to call APIs, we use URL endpoints. These are known as routes or routes, depending where you come from. At the beginning, you have the verb, so that's the get or the post or the delete. And then you have the web address. And then the route itself is slash, and on this occasion, it's /products. So the /products route would return a list of all products. If we specify a product ID at the end of the route, so /products/ID, if we just go over here to the right hand side, /products/1, that would return the product details of one product with an ID of 1. Note that a route can carry out different actions depending on what HTTP verb is used. So for example, if we use the same route as we did before, so the /products route, and we swap the get to a post, so that should mean create a product. So there's the URL endpoint, and obviously the route is /products. You would post that, but you would have to include JSON body. This will all make sense once we sort of demo and go through building the API. So this should create the product and then also return it as part of the response. For routes, it's advisable to use nouns. So for example, /users or /products or /jobs. It's best practice also to have endpoints as plurals, since it doesn't matter if you're retrieving one user or many users, the endpoint will be consistent. For example, /users. If you were just returning one, you wouldn't have /user/1, you would have /users/1. So also a good rule is never use routes like get user, create user, or delete user. These don't follow the REST principles, as you're mixing verbs with nouns. For example, get user. Keep the verbs for use in the HTTP request, such as get, post, delete, patch, and the noun as part of the route, so /users. So in theory, if you wanted to get users, you'd use get /users.